Operating system. Operating system is the very first application that starts once you power your device, whether that be Windows, Android, macOS, or iOS. And it is responsible for running and processing all of the different tasks that you ask it to do while you're using your device. If we think about how the operating system works, we can use this as an analogy. Human beings are using their desks as a space to do their work. It is only a place where they pile up or put their things and start working on them. However, their brains are the ones that are doing all of the processing. And that is very similar to computers. The space where the computer uses to process and put their work is the memory, and specifically the RAM. In the RAM, there are certain slots where all of the tasks that you're asking the computer to do go into it, get processed, and then they leave the RAM. Of course, just like humans, the memory or the RAM is only a space to do the work, but the actual processing is done by the central processing unit. Now, the CPU is a boss. Think of it as a boss. A boss normally doesn't do all of the things in a company. CPU also doesn't do everything in a company. It has managers to do that. In total, there are 5 managers that help the operating system run all of the processes smoothly. First, there is a process manager. Process manager is responsible for prioritizing and executing tasks. Then there's the files manager. If there are any files that need to be retrieved or tracked, then the files manager is responsible for that. Then there's the memory manager. Memory manager allocates and frees the memory. So basically it focuses on the RAM. It looks at how much memory is needed for a certain task, and once that task is completed, it frees up that memory for new and upcoming tasks. Device manager allocates the hardware resources, for example, speaker, keyboard, monitor, mouse, etc. So it gives you access to all those devices. And lastly, the network manager, which handles communication and data. Let's say, for example, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and so on. All these 5 managers work together to make the operating system and the CPU processing much easier. Let's look at this as an example. Let's say you're trying to open up a YouTube video, so that's a task. It's a new task. Of course, you will have the process manager as a bouncer. Before, as we said earlier, the process manager processes the tasks and it prioritizes them. And then you have the memory manager right here, which checks if we have enough memory, and then it allocates it for the task. And once that task is freed, that memory is being freed for the next and upcoming tasks. So if we look at this task right here, which is playing a YouTube video, what the process manager does is that it checks that task, gets it in a queue. It doesn't directly send it into the operating system to be processed. It just puts it in a queue and checks if there are any permissions needed before sending that task to the CPU. And since your task is starting a video on YouTube, then you are most probably going to need the internet connection, and you're going to need access to the device, which is monitor, for example, and speakers in order to hear the audio of that video. Now, the internet connection, that's the network manager getting involved, and then the monitor and speaker, that's the device manager getting involved. Once these 2 grant access to all the resources needed for this task to be completed, that's when the task is being sent to the CPU or the operating system to be processed. Any process requires a certain amount of time to be completed, but once that time is up, the task is being cleared out, and that is when you have started watching the video or have finished watching the video. Now, when the memory is clear and empty, that is the job of the memory manager to clear up the space once the task is completed. Let's say you have additional tasks. Now you've got 3 different tasks which require different spaces of the RAM and different timing to be processed. Again, the process manager is not going to allow all of these tasks at once into the operating system. What it does is just it lets them in, puts them in a queue, and checks in with the memory manager. Do we have enough space to process all these processes or not? And the memory manager would respond. So if we notice here, we have enough space for task 1 and task 2, which is the blue one and the green one. But if we try to add in task 3, then it just bounces back into the queue again because there's not enough space. So the process manager would keep that task in the queue. The operating system or the CPU does not run all processes at the same time. It runs one process at a time. Starts with the first one. Once that is completed, it is being cleared out. Task 2 is being processed, and as you notice, task 3 has already been added into the memory, and that once that is processed, it exits the memory and it clears up the space for additional tasks coming up. And that is how it works. Now let's look back at this last task that we've just released. Let's say, for example, this is the task of opening a Word document that we've saved before. Now this is a file that's been saved earlier, and I want to pull it up to have a look at it, edit it maybe, or just go through it again. In order for this process to be completed, we need a permission from the Files Manager to retrieve that file and open it. So the operating system here, or the CPU, is not going to process this task unless that permission is being granted. Once that permission is granted, then the operating system starts processing it and pulls it up for you as a user to view it. Once that is done, space is being cleared out for additional tasks to come. This is how the operating system managers work together to make the CPU processing much efficient. Check your understanding. Write your answers in the comments below. How many managers are there in an operating system? What does each manager do? Briefly explain how a search the internet task can work, from start to finish. Write your answers and questions below in the comments, and I'll make sure to get back to you as soon as possible.